Welcome back to another video, and in this one we're having a look at how examiners actually go about grading your tests. This entire flowchart represents the entire process. So starting off, it's actually just understanding who your examiners are, and each and every one of them is a qualified teacher or subject specialist in their field, and they've had to meet a set criteria in order to do what they do. They have a relevant degree in their subject specialism. So if it's a science examiner, they'll have a science degree, English, and so on. Next up, they have to have had some qualified teacher experience, and that means at least 1 year of teaching experience. And this can vary. Of course, teachers usually wait until they're a bit more developed in their profession before engaging in examining, but it is open to anyone with 1 or plus more years. They will need references, usually 2 from their head of department and another member of staff, head teacher, or someone of leadership positions. And lastly, they have to be a UK resident. This is important just because it allows them to be fully involved within the entire process, and it's just good to have a peace of mind that none of this marking is outsourced. Right, next up is the standardization process. Now, this just means that it's split up into several processes, where the first one will have the senior examiners who have had the most experience come together and put together this mark scheme that other examiners will be using. And then examiners will then use this draft in order to mark a set number of questions and give back their feedback to the senior members in order to add any corrections or any additions that may need to be added in there. Then comes the examiner training, and this applies to all examiners, where they'll go about marking 10 to 15 questions of each question and using the final mark scheme to get familiar with it. And lastly, they'll pass this thing called the qualification set, where again they'll mark about 10 to 15, depending on the exam board, of each question, and they have to pass at least 80% of those questions in order to be qualified to mark that particular answer or question. And if they don't, they do get to reapply and retest themselves. However, it's 2 attempts and you're out. After this comes the live marking experience. This can vary from different exam boards. Whilst I can't show you the actual marking systems because they are copyrighted, this should roughly outline what you can expect that they'll be looking at themselves. So they'll mark 1 question at a time usually. The examiners don't usually have access to your entire paper, and you can see that it's anonymized. So they don't know who you are, what school you're from, anything to do with you, and it's strictly just focusing on the question and the answer itself. They'll read your answer, match it up with a mark scheme, and then they'll literally just click to allocate a mark depending on how many it's out of. So if it's a 3 marker, for example, like this one here, they just click the 3 if you got all the marks and move on. It can be really, really quick, especially with the 1 markers. Examiners will find themselves just having a quick look and clicking and moving on, spending usually not much more than a few seconds per question. Of course, that varies depending on how long the question is and how many marks are allocated to it. They are also able to highlight any particular parts, and you can see there's always going to be a report function where examiners will actually, after reading your answer, if they feel there's any kind of malpractice or any funny business going on, they can actually flag it and pass it on to a senior examiner, who will then contact the school and potentially investigate even further. It also can be flagged for safeguarding purposes. Really important that this is mentioned, because anything you write on here can technically be traced back to you, because the school has your paper and there is a student ID allocated to that paper as well. However, the examiner themselves would not be taking part in any of that, and they wouldn't know who you are in particular. Now, within this marking process, there is a quality assurance aspect baked into the entire marking. Now, examiners will be held accountable for what they mark, and this is done through several ways. There'll be these seeded questions within their allocated marking. These are questions where a senior member of staff has marked previously, and the examiner's marks allocated need to match up. And if they don't, their validity score will begin to decrease, and their total validity must equal at least 80% in order to be marked and qualified as correct. Now, if they do drop below this validity, they'll have to go through something called a requalification set, where they'll remark 10 seeded questions, and they know it's a qualification set, so this is something that has been marked previously. And again, their accuracy needs to be at least 80%. So out of those 10, they have to get 8 of them correct in order to be allowed to carry on marking that particular question. If they do not manage to do that, they'll be removed from that particular question. However, they'll be allowed to carry on marking the rest of their allocations. This is a random quality assurance process. There will be also the senior member or the team leader that will go about checking randomly some of the marks that have been allocated by their team members. And this entire process helps keep the examiners true and honest to the mark scheme and reduce any possible marking errors in your grades and your allocated marks overall. This does not mean your marks will always be perfect, but it does mean it is very accurate as much as possible with as little error as possible. And after all of this is done, the senior members of staff will come together and analyze all the data that has been provided from the various marking across the entire paper. They'll look at all the marks allocated, the difficulty of the question, and they'll also come together and look at how many marks people have lost and which questions people found most difficult and which ones were easiest. Using all of this, they'll analyze all this data, then brings us on to the final process of this examination flow, and that's the grade boundaries. Again, this senior members of staff will come together, they'll use their expertise, they'll use previous exam difficulty and data and grade boundaries, as well as the overall marks in the exam series that has just been sat, in order to come and put together the grade boundaries that will essentially decide whether you pass or you fail, or what grade you achieve overall, and essentially what you can then take on to further education, if you so will, with that particular subject. And that's essentially it. That entire process comes together to make your examiner marking process. And you'll find that it's not perfect. There are errors, which is always why you should potentially look into getting your paper remarked. There is a fee involved in this. However, subjects such as English and more written-based subjects or heavily written-based subjects, you'll find that the marking can be a little bit more subjective, whereas the marking for a math paper, for example, is very objective. You either get the answer or you don't, whereas English exams, for example, are up for interpretation. There has been cases in the past where students have gone up a grade or two from having their paper remarked on an English test paper. Now, after this is all done, your schools will receive your test results first. They'll do their own analysis. They'll print out your grade sheets ready for you to collect. And again, you may request your script, your test paper, or have your grade reviewed if you so wished after you collect your grade sheet. This is definitely something you should consider if you are a few marks off the next grade up, and if that does make a difference in terms of getting you to the next step or the next course that you want to access. Right, I hope you did find this video useful. All the best of luck with your upcoming results, and if you have any questions, just drop them down below and I'll do my best to get back to you.